Okay, welcome everybody to tonight's Flameless Fireside podcast. We are coming at you live from our new platform and excited to have everybody with us tonight. As we get started here, I just wanted to introduce our host, our guest tonight. All of our hosts and our guests, we'll start with that. But our distinguished guest tonight is Lorrain, who is now Lorrain, tell me your exact title down in Utah.
Okay. I am the area co-chair for the Utah County Single Adults, but it's really multi-area. My stewardship is about 127 stakes and roughly 30,000 single adults from 46 on.
Wow. All right. Well, last time we were here, we got into just the beginning of a conversation on some things that we would love to see change in the LDS Singles program. And I think we started going down the rabbit hole on that in our last podcast, but I really think this is an important topic because I know there are a lot of people who want to have something happen in the LDS Singles program and see something change. And so tonight we're going to get an opportunity to discuss that. But before we get too much into it, for those of you who are just joining us tonight, either on Facebook or on YouTube, welcome. We're happy to have you. Let me introduce our other host tonight. We've got Celeste, our resident dating and life coach, the wonderful Joyce, who is our VP of awesomeness, we call her, and Corey, our secret spy agent, FBI guy, who is constantly in the wings for us, and happy to have everybody with us. So Lorraine, last time we talked about this is an important topic because I think this is one where people, they sort of come off of being either in a relationship or maybe they're widowed or divorced or what have you. And if you've never been in the singles program before, it can be a very scary and daunting thing that just suddenly slaps you in the face. And so tonight we really wanted to talk about this and talk about how we can maybe make some changes and some things that we would like to see. Now, before I preface this, let me just say this is in no ways an opportunity to bash the church. We are not interested in telling the church that they're doing it all wrong. We're not interested in saying, hey, you guys stink or anything like that. This is just an opportunity for us to throw out some ideas, to brainstorm and really come up with some options that we think, hey, as people who've been in this down this road before in these shoes, what would we like to see different if we could, just in a perfect world, if we had the opportunity to make these changes? So we're going to talk about that tonight and kind of get into it a little bit. Before we start, we had a unofficial poll that we had posted online, and let me pull that up here just real quick. The unofficial poll was sort of Celeste, correct me if I'm wrong. It's basically a poll that says if you could make changes, what would you like to see?
Yeah, just like what would you like to see? What would benefit you and help you as an LDS single? What would you like to see? Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is what we came up with. These were kind of the results of the poll. This is how everything sort of shook out a little bit. And so I think that probably our good starting point for tonight would be to start with number one, Church LDS Singles app. And a lot of people, this was the number one that came out. Lorraine, I don't know if you've discussed this at all in your circles, because I know you're kind of tied into some of the pilot program changes going on there, but have you heard anything about this?
I haven't heard anything about, I've heard little discussions, but nothing definite. So I'm not much help there. I know that I have someone who's developing one and would like to present it. And so that's about all I know, but I think it would be wonderful if we could do that. But right now, I don't know of anything that's definite.
So this is kind of a thing that we run into quite a bit on the show, is people who are new to the singles world, and they're just simply like, where do I go from here? What do I do? And they turn to these dating apps that are out there. Mutual's one. Uh-oh, I'm hearing some feedback on
Yeah,
somebody.
someone's got feedback.
Mutual is one. LDSSingles.com, I think, is another. There's several that are out there. However, when you get on there, oftentimes it's very difficult and people run into, I'd say, less than savory other individuals, you know. It's almost enough to make you feel like, I don't want to be single. This is awful. This is terrible. I don't know where to go from here. I do know, and one of the things that's sort of interesting on this, the church has an app called Gospel Living. Have you downloaded this app before?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting because they sort of have like the framework of this in place, although it's not quite there yet. Like I remember sitting in elders quorum, and you can create like circles and you can kind of create like your little friends groups and things like that. And I think they tried to kind of get this off the ground to get some things moving for it. And to try and get some things going where you could say, okay, you know, we want to put together activities, for example, for our ward. So our elders quorum presidency put together like all these activities and stuff. And we had, other than people who logged into the app, you know, right there, because we were sort of walking people through it as part of our lesson, there really wasn't anybody else that was using this, right? But the idea was there. And so it was kind of interesting when you sort of scroll down and you look at this. I mean, if you download the app for your phone, it's going to give you stuff like, okay, what are some good things that you can listen to, some good talks you can listen to, etc. And last time I checked on there, I think the last message from our ward was like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, something like that. And so the idea is set, but the implementation is not quite right, you know? And I look at this as, if I'm single, let's say I'm coming off of a divorce and I'm like, I have no idea. I've been married for 25 years. I have no idea where to turn, right? This is where people sort of like run into a wall. Like, where do I go from here? And then they go to these apps like Mutual or something like that. And they're like, I meet weirdos. And they just don't know. They don't know where to go.
Are you saying to use use part of that gospel app as a church, from the church, as a dating site, or as an activities?
Here's the okay. Yes, maybe I should clarify this a little bit. So
yeah, you can sit in sacrament meeting and swipe right, swipe left.
Wait, what are we talking about? Yeah.
No,
there's liability with the dating one, but yeah. Okay. Just clarify for me.
Okay, so this is kind of the app that they've got, right? And so some ideas on this are, okay, I'm single. Let's say I'm a bishop. Let me just kind of like reverse the roles a little bit. I'm a bishop. There's somebody in my ward that just went through a divorce or widowed or whatever. And they're like, I don't know what to do. I can say, hey, there are singles in our stake and throughout the area that are dialed into this app. This lists the activities. It's a way to meet other people. It's got resources for support groups like divorce support groups or whatever. And then there's other gospel topics about maybe talks on divorce or talks on like, you know, weathering the storm or whatever. So I just see it as sort of a resource where somebody can immediately turn and start saying, hey, you know, I would like to meet other people, not necessarily a dating app, but I just want to know who else is out there, right? Because I don't know.
You know, like when I first became single, like when I reached out on the dating apps, like Facebook, I was actually looking for women. I was looking for other single women because I was the only active single female in my ward. So yeah, I mean, having that place to go to connect, not necessarily all for dating and things like that, but just to be like in a group that understands and you can talk the same talk and you're walking the same walk. Like that's important, I think.
Yeah. When I was first divorced, I actually was moving to Mexico City for work and they didn't really have a singles program down there, a singles ward per se. And, you know, Mexico City is a huge city. And so I was going to the family ward, the embassy family ward. And it just was weird being the single guy. And you could just tell as a single person that nobody really knows how to deal with us. There's all kinds of stigmas. There's all kinds of assumptions that are made when you get there. Like, oh, well, maybe Corey was the bad one, you know?
Yeah.
So,
It's always the man.
It's really,
it's always the man, because, you know, we're just a bunch of dogs.
What did
But,
you do?
you know, you go there and you can feel it. Like, you can feel like the wives telling their husbands, you can't go play with Corey. You can't, you know, stay away from Corey. He's a bad influence. You know, you can almost feel it because the guys are super friendly, and then 2 weeks later, they're not. It's almost like the wives had a little talk with him and said, be careful with Corey. He's single. He's hanging out with a bunch of single women.
It can rub off on you. So it's just
and I think that sometimes, even if it's not sort of a judgmental thing, sometimes it's difficult to make friendships with married women because the time that they have free, they want to spend with their families. And so like the evening when their husbands are home, which is the time I have because I work a 9 to 5 kind of job, they just don't have that time available. And so it's difficult. It's difficult. Whether there's an ill intent or not, it can be really challenging. So like from my perspective, the idea of having something that says, okay, let's say your ward or stake doesn't have things going on. If I knew where to get in touch with people nearby to sort of have a better idea. I mean, we use these Facebook groups and they've been super helpful. And I've made so many friends that way. But they're not in my area because the people in my area may not be necessarily actives on these Facebook groups. So, having some kind of resource that could say, okay, I would drive an hour and a half to 2 hours to go to a dance if I knew that where there was one. And that's just really tricky because if someone's not active in communicating and making sure it gets all the way down to the end of the row, I don't know about these things. So.
Yeah, to be clear, I've seen a couple comments in the comment section that, there's some, they wish people use this more. This isn't really very active, I don't think. I don't know that anybody's really using it. There might be some wards somewhere. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Lorraine, you're down in kind of the hotbed of Utah County. So, I mean, maybe this is a thing down there, but.
I was thinking our area, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
So our area is really the only organized area. And as you're talking about making these connections, I think it's wonderful. But in so many areas, there's just nothing for you to connect and be unless somebody takes the lead in doing that and doing their own groups. And that's where the problem is that would be great if we could have that. It would be great if we had divorce support groups. It would be great if we had the things on this list. It would be wonderful and be able to connect it, but there just isn't any. And we're the only organized area in the in the church. We're the only area, and I know that they've been trying to use it as a pilot program for a long time, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we're seeing that in the chat, people are talking about Facebook groups, which is fine, but not everybody's on Facebook. Not everybody has, wants to go subscribe to a page, or some people just want to take a break from social media after a divorce or something. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I think this is a fantastic tool that the church has the framework for. But if they built it out a little bit more and kind of added it and said, hey, okay, look, if you're single, let's go here. And any activities that get put on the book get uploaded in here. So let's say, for example, I'm traveling to Utah. I'm coming down to your neck of the woods, Lorraine, and gosh, I want to know what's going on next weekend.
We got lots.
You do. You lucky you guys.
You guys are just, partying it up down there. But if I wanted to go to that area and I wanted to see what was happening, I could say, okay, you know what? I'm going to be down there visiting family, and I want to know what's happening next weekend because I'm going to be in the area. Then I can pull up this app, and I can look, and I can change the location, type in a zip code, whatever you might do, however it would work, and say, okay, what's going on? and the activities are all listed there, and maybe a couple contacts to local singles reps in that area or something. So I could say, hey, I'd like to call Lorraine. Hey, I don't know anybody, but I'd really like to go to this. Do you have any info, or maybe like, some people that are meeting beforehand, and I could show up something, So I think this is my kind of opinion on this, my little idea of this is an opportunity for the church, because correct me if I'm wrong, Celeste and Corey and Joyce, how many people have come on like, what do you guys think about Mutual? And it's like, it's a disaster.
Yeah. Well, the problem,
Yeah.
I don't like Mutual because it's, it only filters by age, right? So you don't really, like if you say, hey, I'm willing to date, 5 years above or 5 years below or whatever, people are just filtering on like their age. Like, I just want to date somebody who's exactly my age. Right. And so you're really never getting included in those types of apps. I mean, they're very, it's not, I mean, you never know. You might meet somebody who's, 10 years older than you, that you guys are made for each other. And the person's, in great shape and very active, and you just miss out because people are like, well, I want my filters to be right here. So I don't like the apps that much because of the filtering.
Right.
I love your idea of this gospel living app, and I kind of know who I can probably give this idea to, which would be wonderful, because think about how connecting that would be wherever you are. And but it would take people putting the time and putting those things in. When I go travel, I'm always looking, is there a dance in Washington? Is there,
I think it would just be reminders of like, everybody out there has to say, hey, if you're going to have activities, go to Gospel Living and post them in there. And then like I like what Everett said, is because a lot of people in our age group, they're professionals and they travel for work, and they go visit their kids, and they go to their mother's house for Mother's Day, and they're traveling and they're going different places. It'd be awesome to be like, hey, I'm going to be in Utah and I have nothing to do Friday night. What's going on? Right. And if you had a feature in there where you could like list yourself in there as going, then you could say, you can even put a message with it, like say, hey, I'm going Friday night. I don't know anybody. And maybe somebody would reach out to you and say, hey, bro, we're all getting together at the McDonald's or the whatever. I mean, not that you meet at McDonald's, but we're all getting together somewhere prior to going to the event. We're going to go as a group.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And I think, Corey, I think that's a great idea, because I've been to singles conferences in sort of a small town. I went to one in Cedar City a while, I guess it was last year sometime. And the people were lovely, but they didn't know what to do with me, because, I would say I'm from Maryland when I would introduce myself, and they would be like, oh, okay. So that means probably not really going to get to know you well because you're from out of town. And so, so I think that the idea of saying, hey, is there someone here who, because I don't know anyone, I'm going to this activity, and, it's difficult. It's a scary thing for all of us to go into a singles activity and not have a wingman, like to just go all by ourselves. And so something that could sort of help us when there is someone new, let's make them feel welcome. That could be really useful.
It was stated in the chat that it could be an issue if it's a church app and everyone's just kind of adding, because I encourage my clients to create events, go and do and get out there and be the person who's inviting others to have something to do, to feel welcome and included. And so I would want them to be able to share those things on there. But as pointed out, if everybody's sharing on this app and it's not quote like a church activity, where does that line, at what point? Because what if something happens at the, if
it's on the Gospel Living app, it has to be church supported. And so it would just have to be church supported.
It would have to be.
That's where Facebook comes in. Like,
right.
Because a lot of Facebook people would like say, hey, we're all getting together at like Lake Powell and we're renting a boat. I'm sure the church would be like, no. It's like, you guys should not be getting on a boat and spending a weekend together on the lake. So
Right. Like this Thursday, we're getting together at Fat Cats in Saratoga Springs at 6:00. So like, that's just a total Facebook thing. Like, we'd never put it on a church thing, but anyone's welcome. that's great. But so I think you're right that there should be some that are church supported, and there are going to be activities that are not, and the Facebook groups can be really useful for that. But I think one of the things I've really come to see recently is the people, like there's a tremendous number of people who are not at all engaged in these Facebook groups. There's so
You know
many
what?
other people out there
Yep.
who just
But
don't even know about it, and so they're not making connections. They, like I wish they knew. I have many
but
single
they
friends.
don't know. That's
Yeah.
the problem. They don't know.
Well,
We have so many people in Utah that don't even know that our group even exists, and they go, "Wait,
Yep.
what? I've been single all this time, and there's all of this, and I didn't even know."
And you
And
also
so-
have those who are afraid of social media, right?
Yeah,
Like, I mean,
That's
it's
true.
kind of taboo a lot within our church. So, and
Mhm.
I know that the leadership's trying to say, hey, you can use it for good. You can be used for good, and they're trying to kind of change that outlook. But I do know that there's many that kind of wear it as a badge of honor. I don't get on social media, so there has to be a way to get to them as well. But for those who do use social media, I think that app and utilizing it for the singles would be a fabulous idea.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So
Well, somebody suggested Meetup, and I don't know if you guys have ever used Meetup. It's an app, but I've seen some Christian groups. When I first got to Phoenix, I looked at it for like hiking, because there's people that meet up to go hiking, and there's mountain biking, and you can go to almost any activity. And if you really want to nerd out, you can go find out where the D&D games are and go meet up and play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons for those that aren't nerds. But it's a cool little app, and somebody suggested it. You could go in there and create an LDS meetup if you wanted to.
For those who aren't like sponsored by the church. Yeah, good idea.
yeah. Okay, so we could probably spend an entire podcast talking about just this. Let's go back here. Whoops, to a few of the others. The second thing that we had on our poll, an official poll, was more support for singles from married members. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. Lorraine, we had a mini discussion about this very briefly before. You've got people that they feel like when I am divorced or single or widowed or whatever, I'm not getting a lot of support from my ward. And then you pose the question back, well, if you were the bishop, what would you do? So my question to the group is, what would we like to see done differently from those who are married in the wards for those who are single?
If you were a Relief Society president, what would you want? What would you want them to do for you, and what would you do for you? Either a bishop or Relief Society president, when you look from those eyes, because I have asked that question because I hear over and over again how awful these things are, and I said I get that, but tell me in your day-to-day or Sunday to Sunday, what could a bishop or a Relief Society president do to help you feel better about attending church and being a part of your ward?
Yeah.
Well, I have one thing that I could share, because I've thought about this and talked about this a little bit. But so I'm single, never been married, I have no children, and yet I've served in primary callings, young women's callings for years. So I have supported families just for a very long time. But when it comes to singles activities, we are on our own. So we need to plan it. We need to prepare food. We need to plan the activities. And mind you, we probably want to be very involved in that planning. But the idea that, like, I have served so many married people and their families, and yet I don't know that I've ever seen married people help out with singles events. And so like, there's a part of me that says there needs to be a way that singles are made to feel important enough that the ward and the stake are going to support that. And not just sort of say, well, that's, here's the date and time, you go do that. I just think that that would make us feel like part of the ward if we had members of our ward who were coming to support us by helping out with conferences.
And you know what? The thing is, we have had, because we have stakes supporting us, and we have these people that, and we have so many people that are wonderful and supportive, but we have stake presidents who are saying, wait, you guys are all adults. Why do you need our help? And so there's
And why do you need our help with the young women? You know,
Or
why do
with
you
Relief
need single
Society for
they
that
don't
matter.
right, and they're not understanding what it
Right.
is because we get lots of help for ours because we have
Yeah.
activities once a week, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so we have all these the coordinating councils, and we get lots of help.
Mhm.
But they're just, again, it's not understanding. They don't
Mhm.
understand. And it's making it be aware. And I believe that we're getting that there's movement making it be aware, because they're just like, somebody said to me, why am I here? Was it a dance? Why am I here? You guys need chaperones? And I said, no, we don't need chaperones. We just need your support. So my committee can go and enjoy it. They've done the leg.
Exactly.
We just
Mhm.
need your support. And
Yeah.
so
We need you behind the scenes so
Right.
that we can
Exactly.
enjoy the activity.
Exactly.
Well, also the problem is that the stake presidents have no idea unless they've been divorced before themselves. I mean, it was my stake president out in Virginia. He was on his second marriage. And so when he met me and, he sat down when I first moved there and he sat down with me, he's like, you're divorced and this and that. He's like, yeah, I mean, I'm on my second wife. And I'm like, he gets it. Right. And he was totally supportive of like the young adult program. We had two young adult wards, unfortunately capped out at 45, but they had two young adult wards in DC. And most of them were in that Virginia area. And he oversaw both those wards. But he got it because why? Because he had been divorced.
He'd had the experience when I was, and I've told this story before, when I was in the Stake Relief Society, part of my stewardship was to be over the singles. And I thought, what are they doing? They weren't doing anything. And so I thought, I got this. I am serving these women and I'm helping my counterpart help the men. And we're doing this. That was when I was married. And then when it became and I thought I was killing it. I was not killing it because it wasn't my experience. I did not know until after 34 years, here I am single, and now I get it. And I feel like, oh my gosh, I failed them, because you don't know what you don't know. And it is really hard to serve people you don't know about in that experience.
Yeah. I think that, I kind of felt that same way, right? Being married for 25 years and, feeling kind of guilty that I didn't even stop to consider the singles in the ward. It was just not on my radar because I was too busy with my kids and, my family and eternal happily ever after. We got to get there, right? There was so much focus on that I didn't even stop to consider. So I totally understand that. I totally get where you're coming from. And I think those who have spent a lot of time married and find themselves here, they're kicking themselves too. But I mean, we can't go back and change it, but we can at this point share what we felt. Share that it's not being talked about. But
it also should show grace to those that aren't getting it.
Exactly.
Agreed.
Well, it took like 3 years almost. Yeah, it took like almost 3 years for people to warm up to me in every ward that I got there. And it was only because, I and some of it was callings, and being it, but it took them to hear a couple of talks from me, maybe a testimony or two, or, and they just don't know how to, like Celeste said, they're just like, you're not even my group. But as a single person, you do see in the ward, like you see all the groups of friends that get together and you hear about it. Like you can hear them talking in the hallway, like, oh man, that was great. We went up to the lake house together and all the kids are playing and we got to play Uno together. They're doing all these couples activities, and I would never get invited to those things ever, because obviously I'd be the oddball out, the fifth wheel, but
let them give you the option, right? That's my thought.
But exactly. But I think if the church focused on getting a whole ward with just all singles, I mean, it doesn't matter about age, just all singles, and they could bring their kids to that ward, then the kids are getting, they actually can have something to relate to the other kids, because all the kids in the primary or all the kids in the young women's, young men's, they're all coming from divorced or widowed families, and they have something to talk about. Yeah, my mom's single. Yeah, my dad's single. My mom died, or my parents got divorced, and they have something in common. They're not just the oddball in the family ward.
A divorced kid, right? Yeah. Well, you know what? So I will tell you this. with my calling, we've been asked by the area stake presidency to put together focus groups, and from all single, all ages, never been married, divorced, widowed, all ages, and we've done about 3 of them. Our Area 70 facilitated one of them. And out of all of that, and then it's been run up the brethren ladder, and they are going to be doing something like that, and they're going to be doing this pilot, and it's not just going to be just a YSA stake. It probably will be a stake that is a YSA and a mid stake together. And so they're starting that. I don't know about the children yet, because that's another factor that might be a little difficult to start with, to have primaries and do that. But they're doing exactly what you're talking about. And of course, we're going to do it in Utah because we have a greater congestion of people. But they're doing exactly that because they're becoming more aware that we've got to do something. And what we've been doing is not enough. And it has to change. And we have proposed some ideas for change, because it can't keep going the way it is. And it definitely, I love the idea. We need wards, and people can choose. You can stay where you are if that's good for you, or you can come and have another place for you, because you're right. We don't have all the same needs and pigeonholes. So they are looking at that. They are doing that. They are in the workings to do an entire stake like that.
Can come,
Oh, there you are.
And
I know, Mike, you went away
you
for a
mute
minute.
me.
No.
So, but no, I've had bishops say, "Oh no, you can go," and then other bishops are super strict. They're like, "Must obey the handbook," And so I got to Virginia. Everybody's like, "Oh, you can go. You're only 50. Just go. Nobody cares. You don't even look 50, right? Just go." And so I went there for a few weeks, and then I went to the bishop and said, "Bishop, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm 50, and people told me just to show up." And he's like, "Yeah, you really shouldn't come."
Yeah.
So I'm like, "All right, message received. I'm out of here." So
This is what. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just gonna say we shouldn't have any age groups. I mean,
well, the problem with that is if you tear down all age group walls, then you're going to run into old creepy guys hitting on young girls, and it's.
No, I don't mean the young. You still have to have a YSA who people have never been married.
Even YSA can't be 30 till death. That's a problem.
Yeah, the problem is though, you get somebody in there, so then you have a ward full of like 46 and to 70 of just women, because the men are like, I'm looking for the 40-year-olds, right? So
not necessarily. I don't think so. I don't see that at our activities at all. I don't see that. I don't, to be honest, I don't see that.
And I don't think that's solution for everyone. I am so grateful for the chances I had to work with the youth. I mean, I don't have children of my own, but I had tremendous relationships with these young women I would not have had I been in a singles ward for all these years. And so I don't know that that's really, again, we've talked about this before. There's not going to be a one size fits all, but given an opportunity to go to a singles ward, I might go there occasionally, but I wouldn't want to give up what I have in my family ward, because my life has been made better by the opportunity to serve other people's children. And so I wouldn't want to give that up. And I wonder how many people who would go to a singles ward might really be beneficial in the lives of other people. We could have a real impact on family wards and make them aware of the issues. And if we're all off in a singles ward, we just have isolated ourselves a little bit more. So I'm not in the camp of that's the the solution for all problems, that just have more singles wards, because I love my family wards. So.
Well, that's if.
Oh, no, nobody's saying that. Yeah.
It's if you have a calling, and that's the other.
They see you.
Okay.
But you could work with the youth if they let children, like they let single moms come with their kids to the singles ward, the single adult ward, then you would have a calling work with the youth.
Maybe. Mm-hmm. And again, it depends on how robust. Yeah.
Let's frame this a little bit, because I think we're talking about some structural changes. And one of the things that was tops on the list in our little poll was, let me pull it back up here. having, and we've talked about this for a couple of years here on the podcast, having a general singles presidency. So from the top down of the church, there is a General Relief Society presidency, General Young Men's presidency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why wouldn't there be a general singles presidency that can discuss how do we go about fixing the problems in the singles community, right? And our singles, with our singles members and our wards, et cetera. I can promise you, and Lorraine, you might have seen some of these, but I can promise you with a strong degree of certainty that the church has very specific statistics on what happens to people once they go single. They pretty much, in large respect, fall off a cliff. If we're talking about over half of the church for adults is single, then that's a huge problem if you're talking about people going inactive once they're single. So how do we start working on some of these things that we're talking about to start building out these structures, to start putting things in place and bringing people back to Christ?
Well, I would say, to be honest, I don't know that the church is actually really following or looking to see about these people who become single and then fall away. But because I have asked, as I have talked with so many men, and it's the men that I really worry about, and it's kind of my soapbox, because the sisters get callings in a ward.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, right? Generally speaking. So I asked the brethren, just pick any random state, all in the United States. Can you look to see how many single men, and this was 46 and up, how many single men have callings and how many single sisters have callings? And the percentage was huge. So the single sisters, it's about 45 to 50%. And then of the men, it's in single digits. And Elder Christofferson just talked had a whole meeting and told and counseled these area and stake presidents to prayerfully consider single men for callings. And so it would help you feel more connected. I feel disconnected from the ward I've been in since I moved here to Utah. But a lot of it has to do with my calling. I was married in that ward, but a lot of it has to do with my calling, and my kids are gone. And so that's one way to connect. And that's why Joyce feels so connected to her ward. I not so much. And I love and adore these people. But having a calling does connect you. But the men are, and I see it all the time. I see these men not getting the callings, and then they get further and further back in the chapel till they're on the last seat, the hard in the corner. And then as the sacrament is over, they are out of there.
They sneak in and sneak out.
And they don't come back. And they come to a lot of my activities alone, and they stand alone, and they leave alone.
Yep.
And so it's
a perpetual problem, right? Because it's almost like, once you start down the road, then if you go to the activities and you're inactive, what do you tell somebody you meet? Oh, I don't go to church anymore. But I'm trying. I mean, it's a slippery slope. But I think for the church, again, everybody in the chat too, when we think of a single adult ward, we're not thinking meat market guys, because everybody's like, oh, creepers, old dudes, hitting on women. I think the ward's focus should be on bringing people to Christ, whatever it said. It should be like, how do we address the needs of single people? And how do we give lessons? Because you go to a family ward and all we talk about is my husband and my kids, and we're married and we went to the temple and we're so happy we're a family together. And then you're sitting in the pews going, well, that's not me. That doesn't relate to me. And then you go to elders quorum and they're like, how to be better husbands, today's topic. And you're like, well, I'm not a husband, so I don't know how this relates to me. But if you had a ward that talked about those issues and said, all right, elders quorum, brethren, we're going to talk about proper dating or how to treat a lady again. It's been a while since you've been on a date. So you can have different topics that are gospel related that relate to somebody who's single.
Well, when you were talking, to bring it back to what would their purpose be for a general singles presidency, which is something we've actually proposed, because it needs to start from the top. And we talked about
Yep.
this last time.
Yes.
It has to start from the top. The thing that we all have to understand, whether we're married or not, it is still our individual focus, choices. I mean, I was in a marriage where I did everything by myself and I was married, but, and I think that that can be, that needs to be the point, that even if we're married or not, it is still my choices, my own personal eternal progression alone. And if we talk about us as individuals and the choices that we make alone, I think people forget that.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think that we need to be responsible for those choices. And like, so one thing, I don't like sitting on the back row. So I don't. I literally sit right in the middle of the congregation.
Same.
And so, you know, if that means some family has to move to a different row, then they have to move to a different row. But I feel like I should sit where it works for me. And that's my choice. But here's the thing. It's easy. It's easier to do that when we feel loved by the people around us. It's easier to do that when we feel accepted by the people around us. So I agree that we absolutely have to take responsibility ourselves for, you know, like staying, for doing the things that say, hey, I am here and I have a testimony and I'm here because of that testimony. But I also think it can be made easier for us if people are more accepting and we feel like we have more of a place there.
You know, and
Well,
I've
think about
often believed that the reason why there might not be that, you know, as a whole, that feeling of I belong and I'm a part of this ward and I feel loved and supported, is because I do believe that in the church culture, there's this unspoken rule that if you're divorced and single, you really can't like hang out or mingle with those who are married. And we're, you know, there's a very strong line. If you are married, you can't do anything with someone single and vice versa. And so, and that's calling wise, that's travel wise. I mean, name it, it's been thrown in there. If you're single, you can't be with someone who's married. And I think that is, if we could get to that cultural issue and just be like, you know what, it's okay. It's okay if we're together in the same room. It's okay if we're serving together. It's okay if you're a male and I'm a female, you're married and I'm single, and we are doing something, whatever it might be. It's okay, because guess what? We are adults. And just because you're married and just because I'm single does not mean an affair is going to take place. And I think that we're so fearful of what happens if, you know, the Relief Society president runs off with the bishop. I heard about that, whatever it was, like some crazy story that happened once long time ago. And we just get so fearful and we make that division. I cannot cross that line because what if something happens, you know? And so I feel like that is the barrier, is that our church itself does not blend the two. So how, if our church doesn't blend the two, how do the normal people sitting in the pews feel open to blending those two together?
Well, think of this, Lorraine, too. If you, next time we talk to general authorities, say, when the church was concerned about, you know, Spanish-speaking migrants coming to the United States, we didn't just shove them into family English-speaking wards, right? We didn't just shove them in there and say, hey, good luck with the language barrier, right? They let them have Spanish-speaking wards until they felt they had a good command of the English language, and then they wanted to go to like a ward that was like broader and more diverse, and it just wasn't just, you know, people from Latin America. And I think that's where I think the church needs to look at the singles. I mean, somebody just posted there's 1,031 plus singles in Houston. Like, that's a whole stake. I mean, that's a whole stake of single people.
I know.
I remember my mission was Houston. My mission was Houston, Texas. That's why this brought to my mind. When I left, there were rumors. They kept having these Liahona conferences, and they were these ginormous like state conferences. And that was preparatory to a Spanish stake. And I think about 4 or 5 years later, they actually organized the Liahona stake, which was made up of all Spanish speakers. I mean, that's kind of where, you know, I think the singles, not that we're going to make stakes out of them and everybody's going to be eternally single, but I think that we really got to focus on having just wards for single peoples and not just age group wards.
Because think of the sweet discussions you could have in all of the classes. It would just be different. It would be sweeter. It would be really getting to the meat of helping each other out. And I absolutely agree. I mean, we have Polynesian words. We have all these different words because you have these things in common and culturally in common. And we have our own culture. We really do. And so I absolutely.
And nobody else can relate to us. Like nobody's been through what we've been through. We all were on that same road of eternal marriage, and then boom, it blew up.
Yeah,
right. That
and nobody
dream,
gets it. Nobody can relate.
Well, what did you do? I mean, where was your faith? Because faith can do anything. The Lord can heal anything. But that's what they think in their head. Well, ooh. You just weren't being
just
faithful
pray
enough.
more, read some scriptures.
You should have prayed a little harder. I mean, all things are possible with God, so He could have saved your marriage. Like that's what goes through their head because they they've never experienced it.
Here's the problem. While I do think that those things are important to have faith, etc., and I do hear this argument quite a bit. Like, well, you just need to go and have faith and sit in the. And I even hear this from single people. Just go to your family ward and be faithful and do what you're supposed to do and the Lord will bless you. Kind of the suck it up attitude. But the problem is sometimes with people when they're going through either a divorce or maybe they just got widowed or something tragic happened one way or another, they are in a vulnerable spot. They're not in a spot where you just go to them and say, suck it up, go to church, don't sit in the back, talk to people, get a calling, just do it. It's not the Nike approach at that point. That's when the Savior's like, look, we need to be gentle with this person right now. And they need to be loved. They need to be kind of cared for as part of the flock. They need to kind of be massaged a little bit to remain active sometimes. But if we just take the approach of just, plow through it and you'll be okay, you're going to lose a lot of people that way. You're going to have a lot of people who just are like, I'm not able right now to plow through it. So,
and that's why it's great that Joyce, you can go sit in the middle of because you're secure enough and happy enough. But there are so many people hurting that just getting up and putting on a tie or putting on a dress and walking in there is about all they can do. And so I'm not going to be center. I'm going to be sitting as far back because I am here mostly. Maybe partially.
Yeah, I'm here in person, but my heart.
Right. But
I will say one thing though. I love the very back seats in Sacrament. I consider those the box seats of Sacrament. No. They are fantastic. So
no soft seats.
I just had to throw that out there, but
stop.
Well, and can I make one other point, Lorraine? Is because you're absolutely right. But you know what? There are many married people who feel exactly the same way.
100%.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think that's for me, I love my family ward and I know that I've been really, really blessed to be in places where, I have been accepted and I know not everybody gets that experience. But I also know that, we have people who just barely come in and I'm grateful for the opportunity to get to know and to love them as a single person to a married person. And so really what it comes down to is that if we really have a commitment to living like the Savior does, this should not be such a big divide. But it is.
That should be our focus, right? Mm-hmm. That should be our focus. I can't tell you how many times I've had to sit in my seat after having a conversation or where somebody said something not meaning to be mean, where I've had to sit there and bear my testimony to myself. Why am I here? Yep. Why am I sitting here? Mm-hmm. Why do I believe and why do I keep coming? And so, and I know that there are so many people that can't do that yet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you have to keep remembering in your focus. If we could, and if we would keep our focus on the Savior and the doctrines, I think it would help dispel some of those things about being alone. But I'm in, like I said, I'm in the same ward that I was when I was married, same place. And my people in my ward are so wonderful. My ministering sisters want me to come and sit between them, but then they're snuggling up on their husbands and I'm sitting here.
Yeah.
But there's nothing they can do about that. Right. They're well-meaning. they've invited me, they love me, and they're wonderful, and they check on me all the time, and I am loved up, but there's a disconnect, and it's not their fault.
Mm-mm.
This is my experience, and this is what's happened, and they're trying, but it still feels lonely.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, you feel a little alone in your ward. If I would serve in my ward, that would probably be helpful. But
Yeah, if they'll give you a calling. I know that seems to be, like you're saying, a lot of the men don't get callings. So they do believe that the men, like we said, get the brunt end of the stick. Like, what did you do? You're divorced? Oh, what addiction do you have?
You might be
right?
a bad influence on the youth.
You just get that automatic label. And then the women get the, oh, I am so sorry. I am so sorry you had to go through this. I can only imagine what you've been through.
I'll tell you something interesting, Celeste, about that.
Yeah.
Because I've been in wards where I think that like the leadership was like, I don't know, Brother Hubbard, he might, the kids might be wondering why he doesn't have a wife. And then Brother Hubbard might tell him he's divorced, the big dirty D, right?
Yeah.
But my last word I was in, the bishop was telling me, he's like, he's like, hey, Corey, I really appreciate you working with the young men, because some of the young men could really use some advice from you. Their families are going through some stuff. And I'm glad you're there for them.
You know what? I'm glad you brought up youth, because I do think, and this wasn't in the poll, this is just my thoughts, but I do think if the church wants to know how to help the singles program, it starts with the youth. I think if we teach the youth that there isn't this happily ever after, there isn't this, you've made it to the temple and now you are, you're free to go. You're going to make it all the way. Like if we're a little more realistic, like, you know what?
Mhm.
Marriage is hard. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Yes, your goal is to be sealed for eternity, all of those things, but sometimes that doesn't happen. We have different families that are formed differently, and kind of give them a more realistic view versus like the Disney fairy tale. Then maybe when things do fall apart, they're not sitting there like me going, wait, what? This isn't what I signed up for. Wait, I did everything right. Why 25 years? What? And you just feel so like the bottom has dropped out. But I think if you start with realistic teachings about, what, life is hard. The devil, Satan, is on a rampage on families. And guess what? The odds are that you probably will have maybe a multiple marriage. I mean, that's sad to say, but as of right now, that's what the odds are. So,
well, and what a powerful thing for young people to see a woman who's divorced, who still has a testimony and who still comes to church every Sunday and who still contributes. Like That's a strong message. And so like that's again another reason why I think it's great to have single people in wards. I have a young woman who she's in her 30s now, and I knew her when she was 13, and she's still single. And I feel like I helped to normalize that for her. She doesn't have to feel like, oh, this is like something's wrong with me, because we still have a great relationship after all these years. And I am so happy that because she's living a wonderful life and she just hasn't gotten married. And so she's not alone. And she, so like, I feel like I was able to play a role in her life. And there are just so many women. Like I think about the things that Celeste has been through, and what a great example she can be to young women, so that they can see you can be happy, even if it falls apart. You can find your way back, and you can be strong in your testimony all through that. So I think we're really good at teaching youth, and they're so good at it to accept people who are different. They're so good at it. I mean, I've been moved sometimes by how the youth accept other youth who are challenged in many ways. And so I think you're right. If we can start there, they're just so good at accepting other people. Maybe we raise a new generation who can be more accepting of people who are single or divorced or whatever their situation is.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. I'd like to bring up a comment here. Kind of goes along with what you were saying, Joyce, from Matt Campbell. When we're talking about, like you were just mentioning, Joyce, never being married in the church, I think one of the problems that we're talking about here, when you're brought up in the church, you're going to get married. If you're a girl, maybe you marry an RM. If you're a guy, you serve a mission, you come home and you get married, and you live happily ever after. But there are a large portion of members of the church who either never experience that, or experience that, and happily ever after is not happily ever after. things fall apart, the wheels fall off the bus, things happen, and you're put back in there. And this is where you run into problems. I think what Celeste is saying is very important to say, hey guys, look, let's be realistic about what we're looking at here, especially in today's world. You might find somebody, you might not. But how do you stay strong if you don't? Right?
Exactly.
That is a very, very important topic because a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a taboo topic. You won't hear that
Mm-hmm.
in a word. My kids hear that because I've
Thank you, Matt, by
experienced
the way.
things. Yes, thank you, Matt. But I think it's a fear thing. I think if we start talking about these things that aren't the fairy tale, then it's like, oh, now I've given my kids the okay to get a divorce.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not what it is. You know what? The more education they have, the more understanding that they have, the less likely they will. Like that just is what it is. Like, oh gosh, marriage is tough. This isn't a happily ever after. They were correct. I've got to fight every single day to make this work. I've got to choose to love this person every single day. Like that is what is needed, not you make it there. Oh, la la, great reception and photos, and oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think that, Celeste, I think that one of the things people learn when we are open about talking about how sometimes marriages fail, is that helps them to learn marriage is hard. It doesn't mean that opens them up to, oh, okay, so I don't have to, that maybe I don't have to stick it out with this marriage. I think it helps them to understand it is going to be hard. So it's not a huge surprise when that happens, when they have troubled times. And so if we can prepare them for that, maybe that actually helps them to stick it out rather than to quit. Because they just, why did all this stuff happen? I wasn't expecting it. So I guess it means that I've been a failure. Maybe not. Maybe they just need to understand that it's hard, and we're not really good at teaching that.
Well, they've started doing that, at least in my ward. There's been more discussion about how difficult missions are, going on a mission. And so then they're not going in blind. Oh, this is hard. So I'm going to expect some hard. And maybe we should just talk about being married, how hard it is, or that it's okay to be single, that it's okay for a little bit to be single, because maybe it may not happen. And so as long as we're doing all that we can, right? But that same thing as they start doing it with missions, as they stand up here, my mission was hard. I love that they're saying that now people are going in expecting that. If we could do the same thing with marriages, I think that would be smart, and be careful about how to do it. Yeah. So
I have one more suggestion that maybe when you're talking to general authorities, is that maybe more lessons for the family wards that talk about, because I think I was remembering what Celeste said earlier. When I was married and had my kids, like I was in my own little world.
Yep.
And you also think, hey, I'm not smoking, I'm not drinking, I'm not sleeping around. I don't have same-sex attraction. I don't have all these things. And you think everybody else does too. And then you just don't think what causes divorces. You just think they're quitters. You think that they didn't work hard enough on their marriage. And you're like, yo, bro, they chose drugs over me, or they chose another dude over me, or they chose a same-sex relationship over me. And when people understand, like, oh yeah, that's kind of a rock and a hard place. That's kind of like, I got to get a divorce. You like cocaine or heroin better than me. I mean, I think that the family wars need to realize that the real world is out there, and that people have their free agency, and they choose wrong, and they choose horrible things. And that's why some of our people are single in the ward. So don't judge them,
Well, and also I think another thing that people sometimes judge, which is really unfair, is if your marriage failed, then you made a mistake. You married the wrong person, and you didn't really get the inspiration. You weren't spiritual enough to know that the Holy Ghost is, and that's so not true. There are many people who absolutely followed the Lord's admonition or the guidance of the Holy Ghost or whatever, and married that person, and it just didn't work the way that for whatever reason. But
it goes back to free agency.
I think that's what you get if you're a female. If you're a guy, oftentimes what you get is, who did you cheat on your spouse with? Do you have a porn addiction?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong
Yeah.
with you?
Right.
So the guys, for whatever
you're
reason,
just an overall pervert, and
right.
stay away from Brother Hubbard, because he's stay away from Corey. He's a bad influence. You can't go play with Corey.
We've heard of old Brother Hubbard before. So
That's right. Old Brother Hubbard, careful of him.
I was talking to a man, and he said, "Yeah, I moved into a new ward," and he said I could feel that everybody was thinking DOM was on my forehead. I said, DOM, what do you mean? He goes, dirty old man. That's what people are thinking as he's moving into this new word, and it just
and that's one way it drives people inactive, because guys are like,
why?
Guys won't tolerate that very often. Be like, you know what? I'm not coming to my ward to feel this way. I woke up, I shaved, I took a shower, I put my suit on, I came here in a good mood, and now I'm getting the looks. I'm getting the treatment. I sit down on the bench and everybody scoots away from me.
Yes. I am not even lying. When I first became single, I was a librarian. And the flow used to be certain members of the priesthood coming through. When I became single, guess what? It wasn't them, it was their wives. And it was almost like, you can't go in there now because Celeste is single. And again, it comes back to like, do you think that a guy is going to cheat just because I'm single? Like, I feel like the guys get pummeled to death on this stuff. And
it's them.
Well, even we men, we put you women on a religious pedestal. We really do. Like the women could do no wrong, and the men, we sit in elders' quorum and we just beat each other up like, man, life is so hard and there's temptations everywhere. And then we think that Relief Society is all about like flowers and wonderfulness, and you guys are having spiritual experiences in your Relief Society, and us men are over there figuring out how not to screw up this week.
Yep.
And I think that perpetuates through the church. And so when a man shows up divorced, they're like, yep, that's the guy.
Yep.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is kind of bring it back a little bit. We're kind of going off on all tangents about how horrible people perceive us being divorced. But I think that I want to bring up this comment here. I think this is spot on. And this was one of the things that we had talked about before, is that when you go through something, and I would say a divorce / maybe a widow group, because some people, you're married and then something tragic happens and now you're suddenly single and you're like, what do I do? And you still feel alone. But I don't know if anybody here has been to an addiction recovery program through the church. I've sat in on a couple of those. I think if any of us are being honest, all of us should be in those groups, because there's something for all of us to overcome. They're fantastic. They really are terrific. The way that they handle it, the way they focus on Christ and looking at yourself and just trying to find things to overcome. I think the divorce support group within the church could be a huge boon for people who are coming in to say, I'm new to this. I have no idea what to do now. I don't know where to go. I feel lost. I show up at church and I'm sitting in the back, and as soon as sacrament's over, I'm out of there. Sometimes, if I'm being honest, there have been sacrament meetings where I'm like, I am so not feeling it today. As soon as the sacrament's over, I'm out of there, And I think having something where you feel like, okay, there are options. And in those support groups, that would be a key and critical area to start introducing programs. Okay, you're single. This has happened to you. There's a lot to process here. But let's start talking about how to connect with the church, how to connect with other singles. Maybe if we've got this app going, right? The church the Gospel Living app it's an actual app. It's perfect the way it is. But I think if we were to retool it or maybe change the name a little bit, then we can have it just for singles. And then the church could say, by the way, here's some resources. Here's some ways to start connecting to other people. And then you can start kind of going through that process, but getting them a foundation. And I do believe a support group for divorced people, or maybe even widowed people too, would be a fantastic first step to keep people from leaving the church. What do you think?
And I think just a quick comment. I think one of the challenges we have where that's concerned is you probably don't have a whole bunch of people getting divorced at the same time in any particular stake. And so we run these programs like all of the self-reliance programs. We tend to run them in a ward or in a stake. And sometimes I think we need to think a little bit broader than that. Is there an opportunity to say, okay, in the coordinating council, can we do that for these 5 stakes? So that, because we're going to have that in some other places. I think one of the things that holds us back a little is that when we say, I'm going to do this for our ward, or I'm going to do this for our stake, and there's like maybe 2 people who have recently been divorced, like that's difficult to say we're going to pour these resources in there. But how do we then say, let's stop getting so lost on the geographic boundaries and say, okay, if this is his church, why can't we work in bigger groups than just in those little wards and stakes that may or may not have, support for one particular person going through their problem? So.
Well, and that's why the singles program all over the church is waning, because there are so few in a ward or in a stake. And that's why, from a general position that we can work on these things. So I've attended more than one life after divorce classes that are from other faiths. And there are people that are members of the church going to those.
Yep.
There are members who are former members who are facilitating those because they couldn't find what they needed. And that is awful. Mm-hmm. And so we've taken those books that are so good, and they're topical, and they go through the topics, and they're wonderful. And so we have to do something with it. Could be a loss, because a divorce is a loss, and being widowed is a loss. It's a little bit different because they look at themselves as being different than being divorced or never been married. But single is single, and relationship is, and learning. If we had relationship classes, I think that would be really helpful too. But the life after divorce courses are incredible, and we're practically one of the only religions that doesn't have it. Yep. There's one, they don't believe in divorce either, but there are so many people divorced, and then they have multiple divorces because we're not learning, and we're making the same choices of person, and they don't realize it because they're packaged different. And so, and they're reoccurring, and I see it. Oh, they got married. Oh, it's been a year, and now they're back. And those things have to stop. And I don't know that the brethren realize that this is going on. People aren't able to get the help they need because of finances, or they just don't think they need it. And we all do. Even if your marriage was 100% somebody else's fault, we all have something that we need to learn from and do better in our next relationship, regardless. And so it's a time of growing and learning. And I would love to have those divorce groups, because I know they have widow and widowers conferences and things like that in groups, but divorce, they don't have it. And there's a lot of hurt and a lot of growth that needs to happen.
Even if that growth is like, not so much what can I do better towards someone else, but maybe how can I stand up for myself? What can I do so I don't find myself in that same situation, right? Because there are true victims, and it's like, I don't think they could have done anything to save the marriage, but they can maybe do something within themselves to become better so that they don't find themselves in that situation.
And they don't repeat that.
Exactly.
Right. We need to do that. And I again, it is helping the leadership to understand that this is a real need, because they don't realize that it is. When I told them, no, somebody being married and divorced twice is not unusual. That's not unusual. But it is incredibly sad, and it worries me. It's worrisome. Yeah. So,
well, the statistics go up with every marriage. Your chance of getting divorced increase exponentially. So, yeah, I think that having a divorce group like that is critical. Going back to what Joyce was saying, it's not that there's a specific moment, not like everybody's getting divorced at the same time, but then again, people aren't getting addicted at the same time either.
True.
You know, so it's just an ongoing,
Yeah, you hop in when you can, right?
right. Yeah, and there's just a consistent, and they've got the divorce or the addiction recovery program is like a 12-step program, and then they cycle through the steps. You get to 12, then you cycle back to 1, and then you repeat. And people go through that. Some people go through over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I know people who've gone through there for simple things like eating, you know, like they feel like they just have an addiction to food. And they're not like overly, you know, heavy or something like that, but it's just something for them where they feel like I need to better understand myself and control my urges. And I think in a divorce group, you know, I could even see something in there where they have like people contemplating divorce, where they maybe split off or something and say, how can we help people who are struggling in their marriages and get people who are licensed therapists in this? The church has their own, you know, therapy programs, although depending who you are, there might be mixed feelings about how well they are. But the idea is the same, that we can really do a better job onboarding people into the singles program and offboarding them, I guess, for a lack of a better way to put it, from their past, whatever they're coming from, divorced, widowed, even never married and leaving a singles ward. That's another huge step. You're getting booted out of a YSA ward. You're going into the singles world, single adult world instead of YSA world. Good luck. You know, that the numbers of people who stay active after that are just, you know, they just fall. So anyways, we are kind of, here's the problem with this topic. We could literally go on and on and on about this all night long, but we are out of time. And Lorraine, I know you have more ideas as well. So we might have to have a part 2 of this and continue this discussion on another night. But this has been great. And I really hope during some of this, I know you're dialed in. I know you have some things you can take back as recommendations for people. We can talk about that later. You know, if you're like, hey, what were some of those things we talked about again? I can't remember. No problem. More than happy to like recap and share some of those. But for everybody who's joining us tonight, again, we welcome you either on Facebook or on YouTube, whichever one you're joining us from. Happy to have you. Thank you very much. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe, hit the like button. Make sure you ring the bell so that it'll notify you when we upload new videos. We're happy to have anybody. If you're a part of Facebook, please subscribe to our Facebook page. Happy to have you here tonight. And we will be posting in the chat here our Zoom link. We're not going to post it up here so that random people from all across the internet pop it into Zoom. But for those who are interested in our after party, we would be happy to have you there. We'll post a Zoom link. So check out the chat for that. So again, Lorraine, final thoughts on tonight.
Ooh, boy, final thoughts. I think my final thoughts are that that there is really some prayerful consideration happening for the singles, and that they are wanting to really be prayerful and helpful. And again, it's just educating and being patient, and they're working on it, and they're doing these pilot programs. But for the 46 and ups, we're kind of in a wait and see for a little bit. And so, but we're helping with the younger ones. It's like, all right, well, all that work went for the younger ones, but it's fine. But I'm in a position to be able to make some changes, which is great for an entire area. And hopefully we can start training in some other areas around to be able to teach and show and connect people. But honestly, I think my last words would be is that really just be patient and faithful and hopeful, because they're trying, and it's hard to know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And to help them.
Yes, thank you.
No.
Yes, I hope nobody comes away from this feeling like it was a bash session on the singles program or the church and how they're handling it or not handling it. Definitely, there are things they could do differently, and I would imagine they'd be the first to admit that. But you know, as singles, we are on the front lines. We are the ones experiencing this, so we have ideas that I think can benefit those who may have never walked in these shoes before. And I know certainly the church is not opposed to ideas and listening to feedback and opportunities. So, Lorrain, you are awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show tonight. Thank you, everybody, again for participating. And we will see you next week. Have a great night.
We'll see you in after party in a minute.
Yes.
Very
absolutely.
true.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.